Bonjour mon ami, je suis libre. And welcome back Lucha fans, as today we review Neutron contra el Dr. Caronte. This film is actually considered the highest rated film in the entire Neutron series, with a 5.7 on IMDb. Released on February 15th, 1963, this was supposed to be the end of a trilogy. But as we learn, Neutron cannot die. He came back with 2 more movies. This film stars the legendary Wolf Robinsky as Neutron and Rosita Arenas as Nora Walker, niece to the mad scientist Dr. Walker. This film is also directed by a favorite here, Federico Curiel. Before we dive in, I do want to give a bit of a critique. Now, if you're a fan of Retro Lucha TV, you know El Ojo is a fan of Retro Lucha movies. However, El Ojo is a very humble man, and will admit they need some fleshing out. For example, in the Neutron film series, we have our hero, Neutron, trying to stop the creation of the neutron bomb. Which is fair, but why does our hero share the same name as a superweapon? Hear me out. Would it not have been better if Neutron got atomic powers from a neutron bomb accident? Kinda like Danny Phantom. But with a caveat. Using it makes him sick, or old, or makes his hair white. But what do I know? I review Lucha films. I don't write any Lucha films. Yet. This is not an attack on the film itself. This is more of an observation of the genre. I understand that in the early days there were a lot of constraints. And more often than not, they were working on a budget. But most of the villains of this era were just men in suits. We can look at some early movies like Santo contra el Cerebro Diabólico, a man in a suit, or Los Hombres Infernales, men in suits, or El Rey del Crimen, a hefty man in a suit. Later films like Las Momias de Guanajuato, or Los Campeones Justicieros, and even Las Arañas Infernales would diversify the film's villains, with mummies, mutants, and space creatures. But the early days were filled with just old men in suits. Well, with that critique out of the way, let's find out if this film ends with a bang or with a whimper. And trust me, Lucha fans, you will not see this ending coming. We get the same intro as the last 2 movies, with Wolf Robinsky in Neutron contra el Dr. Caronte, over stills of the neutron bomb. Professor Thomas shows the boys the disassembled neutron bomb and says it is harmless. Carlos jokes that is not what we thought when we were chasing after the bomb. Professor Thomas says he should have a new bomb in 2 days, and Jaime wants to celebrate with whiskey. But a mysterious shadow looks on from the curtains. Then a man with a huge mustache walks outside Jaime's house. It's Tony. Tony arrives at a fancy house and sees a cigar box on the table and tries to smoke one until Guillermo Lesman, a kingpin type man, walks in and tells him not to take one of his cigars. Tony lets this kingpin know that they will have the bomb in 2 days. Tony is happy because him getting the formula means he will be paid 2 million pesos. But Tony gets greedy and asks for an advance. Guillermo Lesman, who is from a different unnamed country, says, "Not until I get the formula." Then Mr. Lesman takes a nap as light fades to black, as Symphony No. 5 in C minor plays in the background. The music transitions to Melodía de Amor, and we are back inside Club Rio. The 3 amigos and Nora sit around a table. The boys begin making constipated faces, and all of them are nervous to express their interest in Nora. They all make their case. Money, Jaime. Fame, Mario. And stability, Carlos. Nora says she can't bear to choose, as it will hurt 2 of them. A very noble act. Then Nora proceeds to choose Carlos, aka stability. Mario asks the server for champagne to celebrate. Jaime mumbles, and to forget. At Jaime's place, Professor Thomas is doing research on the bomb, but he hears a noise. He goes to the living room and finds Jaime? Jaime is faded. In fact, Jaime is drinking his sorrows away since Nora declared her love to someone else. This is after he said he would respect her decisions. So Jaime, with a whiskey bottle in hand, goes to bed. Professor Thomas goes back to his lab, and like a nerd, he writes notes. Then comes in Tony the Mustache Man with 2 henchmen, and they take the formula. Thankfully, Neutron was in the window, for some reason, and jumps into the trio of thieves. There's actually a funny shot in which Tony tries to escape and opens the door, but his head is in between the door and the door frame, and Neutron the hero punches the door and sandwiches Tony's head. It made me laugh. Neutron, being a hero and somehow still alive from the last 2 movies, takes on the bad guys with ease. In fact, 2 of the men run away, and 1 remains knocked out on the floor. Professor Thomas goes and calls the police chief Lozano for more security. Neutron asks the straggler,
I'm Neutron. Who's his boss?
Professor Thomas walks back into the lab and says, No, Neutron! The police chief is on his way, and he will find out who his boss is. Neutron says, No, the law will not get answers. Neutron winds up his fist, and Beto the straggler starts confessing. More like Beto the snitch. He says, My boss is a foreigner, with a very foreign name of Guillermo, or Memo in Spanish. We find out that Guillermo Lesman will pay them $2 million for the formula, on behalf of his unnamed country. Then the police chief and Chema arrive. Neutron says, No need to investigate, he has already confessed. As mentioned in our previous review, El Ojo is not a doctor. He is also not a lawyer. But I'm pretty sure hearsay from an anonymous man in a mask is not admissible in court. But for any lawyers watching this video, leave a comment below whether this is a confession. Neutron gives everyone an Irish goodbye, and the police chief leaves Professor Thomas a few men and says it's suspicious Jaime is asleep. Back at the police chief's office, the kingpin, Guillermo Lesman, enters. He says his government will not be happy that he was detained. Beto, the straggler from the break-in, is brought in, and the chief tells him to sign a statement. But Beto says, I never made a statement, which is true. We never see him tell the police anything. The chief and Chema threaten him. The chief even remarks, Neutron's strategy is better. Back at Memo Lesman's place, a white glove stops the record from spinning. It's Dr. Caronte? Lesman says, Caronte is dead. That is what the newspaper said, replies Dr. Wait, is this the same line from the last film? I don't care. Lesman says, we should work together, and I can make a great offer, while he presses a button. Then, Tony the Mustache and 3 henchmen appear. With Dr. Caronte restrained, Lesman takes off his mask and says, You? After Caronte's identity has been revealed, he goes crazy. We see him fight. And one of the henchmen even suplexes Dr. Caronte. After the fight, Caronte holds his own against 4 men, which is fair since he's able to fight Neutron, but eventually they beat up Caronte. Lesman says he needs to be unalived. One of the men takes out a gun, and Lesman says, Not here, you idiot! Take him to some road, which actually made me laugh. As they take Dr. Caronte's body, Lesman says, Don't dirty my car. I don't think this had anything to do with DNA. It's funny, in this film, this new bad guy in 20 minutes was able to defeat Dr. Caronte, is immune from the law, and was so close to stealing the formula. Back at Caronte's lair, Nick is feeding the automatons in the lab, when suddenly, he gets a telepathic message from Dr. Caronte. Help! I'm captured and on Route 9. Nick puts the automatons back in the kennel, and he leaves. Back on Route 9, the gang pulls Dr. Caronte out of the car to eliminate him. Luckily for Caronte, Nick is already there, and he starts blasting. A few automatons come out and scare off the gang, while Caronte and Nick take Lesman's car. Back at Lesman's place, Tony the Mustache explains they were attacked. He tells Mr. Lesman he needs to escape. Lesman gives a letter to Tony and tells him to leave. Later that night, Lesman is listening to classical music. Then, Caronte arrives with his automatons and he says, "Time to die." But Memo says, "Why? I'm not in a rush." This film actually has a few good one-liners. I recommend you going out of your way to go watch this. Caronte orders his automatons to attack. But Lesman says, "If you kill me, tomorrow the world will know who you are." Dr. Caronte pauses the attack. Caronte then orders Lesman for proof of his threats. So Lesman calls his lawyer to prove his instructions. Lesman smirks and he says he is smarter than Dr. Caronte. And Dr. Caronte says, "Okay." And he leaves. Before Dr. Caronte leaves, Lesman says, "Stop. Do you want to listen to the Fifth Symphony with me?" Back in Dr. Caronte's evil lair, he is writing something down. He calls Nick over and tells him, "This is my testament." Nick says, "But sir, you are stronger than death." Which is true. We have actually seen him come back from Mictlan twice. Dr. Caronte gets an alert that his hideout has been found, and Caronte yells at his automatons to attack Lesman's gang. Then we are transported to a bar, where Lesman's gang is playing cards. Damien arrives and says the gang should be making 3 million, not 2 million. But a knock is at the door. It's the automatons, who are there to attack. They beat up the gang and send them to the Shadow Realm. Then they leave. At Jaime's place, Professor Thomas and Jaime talk. He tries to see if Jaime is Neutron, but a doorbell is heard. Thomas is still suspicious that Jaime did not hear any noise. Then the chief and Chema arrive. He tells them that Dr. Caronte is alive. Then the chief turns his attention to Jaime and asks, "Why were you asleep last night?" Jaime responds with, "It was due to whiskey." Jaime leaves the table, but the chief remarks he is still suspicious of him. At the gym, Carlos and Mario are grappling, and in sweaters for some reason, when the trainer yells, "Muy bien!" and the boys continue sparring. Jaime arrives, and the coach says, "You're late." Then the coach walks away. Jaime tells the guys, "Caronte vive? Again?" The boys don't seem shocked, since Caronte has been unalived twice already. The coach comes back with Nora, and says, "You guys have a guest," then leaves. Jaime tells everyone that Lesman's men have been unalived, and that Lesman is sad. Lesman also knows who Caronte is. They plan to ambush Lesman tonight, as he is going to visit Jaime at midnight. Back at Lesman's place, he is on the phone, and he threatens Caronte before hanging up, and says, "Do you hear that? It's Crucible de Dieu by Wagner." No, not that Wagner. Dr. Caronte is on the other line. He tells Nick, "I am defeated." Nick asks, "What will we do, doctor?" Cough, cough. Pretty sure he's not a doctor. He tells Nick that maybe these books will help, which is fair. Reading is important for adults because it stimulates the brain, helping to maintain cognitive health and reduce the risk of conditions like Alzheimer. Additionally, it provides stress relief, enhances empathy, and broadens knowledge. Dr. Caronte says, "They are ancient books of magic, written by alchemists from medieval times." He says, in these times of science, no one believes in these old books or reincarnation. Today we ignore the great magician Paracelso. They ignore the science of telepathy and clairvoyance. And something more important, the transmutation of souls.
Cough, cough. Dr. Caronte is definitely not a doctor.
He takes the books and walks away. Down in his lab, Dr. Caronte plans on taking over other bodies to defeat Lesman, then tells Nick to leave since he is getting a message from beyond. Outside Jaime's place, the house is surrounded by police. The chief says, "Don't let anyone in." Inside, the three musketeers, Nora, Professor Thomas, the police chief, and Chema are waiting. Jaime offers everyone Egyptian cigarettes, and he talks about how much he has to pay to import them. Everyone is upset that Lesman is late. Then, a doorbell is heard. It's Lesman. He says, "Hello, Nora, Mario, and Thomas." The chief says, "Hurry up and talk." Lesman says, of course I will. Then he says, it's him. It's Jaime? What an actual twist. I thought it was Professor Thomas. Jaime says he did it because Daddy didn't care, and he is sick and twisted like any man. Jaime takes Professor Thomas hostage and drags him to his lab. Lesman yells, I have completed my task, as everyone else looks on. Bang! They go inside, and Jaime's in a red puddle. Thomas says he shot himself, and Nora cries. We get a close-up of Lesman saying it was his only option. He was desperate. He called to threaten me, then pleaded, then promised he would give me the formula. Carlos says, I can't believe Jaime would end it like this. Mario says it is the best thing that could have happened to him. Professor Thomas goes to his desk and notices the formula is missing. And so is Lesman. They search the house, but Lesman is gone. None of the police outside the house noticed he left. At Televicentro Studio, Nora is singing. Funny enough, Rosita Arenas, the actress who plays Nora, is actually from Venezuela, and actually starred along other greats of the golden era of Mexican cinema, including Pedro Infantes, Cantinflas, and Tintan. After one of the stagehands says, you sure have a lot of admirers, Nora says, he's not a fan, he's my boyfriend. The stagehand points, but no one is there. Carlos says, Lesman is missing, but he has not left the country. All the exits in the country are blocked. As they walk away, Carlos notices Egyptian cigarettes on the floor. Jaime's favorite brand. Carlos looks worried. At Dr. Caronte's lair, Nick is asleep. Lesman pulls a gun on Nick and threatens him for the formula. Nick pleads that he doesn't have it. Lesman says 3, 2, 1. Nick says, wait, I don't have the formula, but I have his will. Nick digs a hole, and Nick says, there it is. Lesman tries to take out the box, but Lesman falls in, and Caronte is alive. Again? Caronte yells, he is not immortal, he is beyond life and death, while Nick buries Lesman, and the screen goes to black. Funny enough, I think the actor got dirt in his ear because he begins to cover it mid-scene. At the police chief's office, he gets a call. Lesman has been sent to the Shadow Realm. At the morgue, the chief and Chema look on. They wonder who could have done this. Neutron appears and he says he knows who the killer is. It's Caronte. But the police chief says, no, Caronte was Jaime and his body's over there. Neutron says, this is unexplainable. I thought Jaime came back to life. For once, I am very afraid. If we do not stop him, the world is lost. We go back to Dr. Caronte's lair, where Nick and Dr. Caronte are setting up the bomb. Nick says, I didn't know it was this easy to set up the bomb. And Dr. Caronte says, I can't rest until I have Nora. Meanwhile, back at the cabaret, the promoter says someone wanted to talk to her, but he wouldn't accept a bribe, so he told him to leave. On the stage, the MC announces Nora Sanders. She sings. No, I couldn't find the name of the song. I'm sorry. But if you recognize it, you know what to do in the comments below. Carlos and Mario look on and applaud. After the set, she goes back to her dressing room to change. But she hears a tussle outside. Nora is scared. A man's voice shouts, "Open!" from the other side of the door. The MC then leads the remaining 2 musketeers down the stairs to find the body of the promoter on the floor, and he says, "See, I told you I heard a noise." They rush to Nora's dressing room. It's Nora. She's hysterical. Back at Caronte's lair, he says, "It's Carlos's fault. If it weren't for Carlos, Nora would have never rejected me. He must die." So later that night, at Carlos's place, 3 automatons arrive. But Carlos sneak attacks the automatons. He leaves in a car and head over to Jaime's place, which is heavily guarded. He goes to see Professor Thomas, but he is not in his lab. Or his bedroom. He goes to the police chief's office and tells him Professor Thomas is missing. The chief tells Carlos that Dr. Caronte must have done this, and he will use the bomb. Carlos says, of course, but he will first use it to protect someone. And the police chief asks, who? And Carlos just responds with the word, Nora. At Nora's apartment, Muriel, the maid, wakes her up. Just then, Carlos, Mario, the chief, and Chema arrive. She asks them what's going on. They tell her Caronte is back, and they will assign officers to protect her. Meanwhile, in Caronte's lab, he yells he wants to end Neutron forever, and he orders Nick to tell the world he will use the bomb. Nick just says, okay. Back at Televicentro, Mario gives a corny news report. Caronte has created the neutron bomb. Never surrender to evil. Neutron fights for justice. And now, with sports. He goes into the hallway, and a bunch of reporters start asking him questions, until someone hands him a letter. He runs back into the news stations and pushes the sports guy, and announces Neutron has decided to give himself up, to save the world and calm the people. Now back with sports. The chief asks if this is true, but Mario gets a phone call and leaves. At Nora's place, she gets a phone call and goes to El Centro. She's able to get past the police by saying it is safe, and the police let her leave. She gets in a taxi and it's off. But it's a trap! The taxi is actually driven by Nick. Back at Caronte's lab, he is in a radiation suit, looking like El Robot Humano. When suddenly, one of the automatons brings Neutron. The automaton unmasks Neutron and says it's him, it's Mario? Caronte, in shock, says it's you! Nick takes Nora to Caronte's dungeon, where he finds Professor Thomas. She says, you called me an hour ago. Thomas says, it was not me, it was a trick. Nick interrupts and says, Dr. Caronte needs you. The professor ominously says, I hope to see you again, as he leaves the dungeon. Nora, being a genius, says, don't go, he will just kill you. While Professor Thomas responds with, he'll do it regardless. Goodbye. Leaving Nora alone in the dungeon. Until Dr. Caronte arrives. He says, I am here for a greater purpose. You. The world is going to be destroyed, but you can stop that. Pause. In the last two movies, the bomb went off, and at best, it's a smoke bomb, because no one died. In fact, both Neutron and Dr. Caronte came back. Twice. Anywho, Nora yells, Jaime, stop! But Caronte says, Jaime is dead. She begs him to turn himself in, but Dr. Caronte refuses. Before he leaves the cell, he says, if you need anything, all you need to do is ask. Back at the police chief's office, he yells at his men for letting Nora get captured. He yells, who is she to decide she's safe? Which is fair. For the last 3 movies, the cops are kind of useless. They let Lesman slip and Thomas get captured multiple times. Back in Dr. Caronte's dungeon, Professor Thomas tells Nora that Neutron has been captured. Being a scientist, Professor Thomas pleads with Nora and says, the only way to save the world is to be with Caronte. Then he begins to speak like a man possessed. Because he is. The spirit of Jaime has taken over Professor Thomas. Somehow, he has achieved the ability to change into other people's bodies. Kinda like Captain Ginyu. He takes Nora by the arm and leaves. Caronte threatens Nora to join him or he will eliminate Mario by throwing him into the automaton hole. That is, until we get a second Dr. Caronte. He yells, this man is an imposter, then shouts at everyone, stop! They do the Spider-Man pose for a while, until all the automatons decide to listen to the masked Caronte, and stop Dr. Caronte in the body of Professor Thomas. The masked Caronte says, stop! His cowardness sickens me. He orders the automatons into the hole. After all the automatons are back in their hole, Nick tells the masked Caronte, this man tricked me, master. The masked Dr. Caronte is pleased. Then he karate chops Nick. It's Carlos. It was a trick to impersonate Dr. Caronte. The real Caronte was in the body of Professor Thomas. The real Dr. Caronte tries to escape, but Carlos follows him, as Mario and Nora look on. Until Carlos punches the real Dr. Caronte in Professor Thomas's body, and he falls off the rafters. After his fall, Carlos and Nora start making out. And Mario says, "Hey, let me out." At the police chief's office, he says, "Well, that's the end of Dr. Caronte. No one will threaten the Earth again. But if someone does, he will be there to stop them. He fights for truth and justice. Neutron." And that is the last and final film of the Neutron film trilogy. So what do you think? Did this film tidy everything up? Well, me neither. But do not fear, Lucha fans, because although this is the end of a trilogy, we have 2 more Neutron films to review. So stick around, because there are a lot more Lucha films de Tres Caídas coming your way. How was the competent Guillermo Lesman defeated by Dr. Caronte? Was Jaime Dr. Caronte in the first movie? Why does Carlos have a Dr. Caronte outfit? Why was Professor Thomas staying in Jaime's place? I get that Jaime's dad and Professor Thomas were friends, but I feel like he overstayed his welcome. Wait, who's the real Neutron?